Hello, it's time for another episode of It's Not About You. We've been talking about selflessness. My name is Pastor Bob Benson. I pastor Christ Lutheran Church out in Bemis Point. We've gotten this idea. We live in such a selfish society that we've gotten the idea that it should be all about us, and it's really not. We've been talking about how even our salvation is not about us. Now, we do benefit from our salvation. We know that we're going to spend an eternity with Jesus Christ in heaven, and I look forward to that day. But as we live this life out, how is it that we're being selfless? And I think part of that has to be an internal asking ourselves, what is it that God's called us to do? And how are we engaged in what he's called us to do? You know, my calling's completely different than a lot of other pastors around. And we see successful pastorates, we see successful churches, and we want that, but we're all called to get there in a very different way. My ministry is completely different than any other pastor I know, and that's okay. So the success that my church or my disciples see may look different than it does for any other group. If we have to continue to ask ourselves a question. I am a part of society, and if every part of the society was doing the things that I'm doing and investing in the society the way I am, what kind of a society would that be? And that's a hard question to ask yourself, because you have to evaluate what it is God's called you to do and how successfully are you fulfilling that calling, which looks different than anyone else's. But because it's not about us, it's about God's calling in our lives. You know, we are not called to be successful. We are called to be faithful. The Bible says when we get to heaven, what do we want to hear? Well done, my good and faithful servant. Now, that's not an excuse not to try hard, but it is about being faithful. And then we leave the success up to God. And what is success? So many times that we measure success completely differently than God does. If we see people growing deeper in a relationship, isn't that success? It's not necessarily numbers and noses. Having more people come to church, more people engaged in ministry, I think that's great, but that's not what we're called to. We're called to be faithful in what God has called us to do. So I would tell you, to be selfless, you need to invest in people. You need to be working to make a great society and engage in the culture that we live in. So for It's Not About You, my name is Pastor Bob Benson. Thank you for taking the time to